Well, it's great to be with everyone here. Thank you for being with us. We're celebrating Advent, and as we know, Advent is all about anticipation. We're anticipating the arrival of Christ, and we're reminded of that. And one of the things that we anticipate and we look to in Advent is how Christ is present in the midst of all that is taking place in the world, especially among those who are often overlooked. Now, 1 in 4 children are in immigrant homes, so families that are, that have a parent that, or 2 parents that are that are coming from immigrant context. I'm curious, as we look at the state of the world today, what you think is important for us to consider, especially around the issue of immigration. And as you think about this, especially from a Christian context, I'd be curious what each of you would have to say. Why should we engage with the issue of immigration?
Well, I'm so happy to be here because Advent is actually my favorite time of year.
More than Easter?
More than Easter. And I'm going to tell you why. I hate waiting. I just can't stand it. And so I think Advent for me as a pastor and as a human being has always been a great time to just like sit with the reality that we are in tension of what God has promised and what will come. And it's a hard discipline, but I think it's important for me. I remember in my 20s as a single woman, in that time, everyone's getting married. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to wait. And then as someone who couldn't have children for a really long time, oh my gosh, I have to wait. So I feel like the Lord has always met me in the waiting, which is good. So I think in Advent, I'm always like, God, what do you want to teach me right now? And I think as we think about Advent in the context of migration and immigration, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is that we live in a world where everyone is moving. We live in a time of unprecedented global displacement and migration. And our experience here in the US is just a tiny piece of that. And so we have siblings that are all over the Middle East, all over Africa, all over Europe, migrating and moving. And it is the image or the picture of the Holy Family migrating and moving on the move. And it is a remembrance of God's people who were almost always on the move, whether they were displaced and taken or whether they were themselves moving from something. And that is a great invitation for us to, when we see those Christmas cards with a little Holy Family moving, you just think that there's holy families that are moving all the time. There's sacred families that are moving, and there's sacred movement happening right now in this time of Advent. So I think that for me is it's an invitation to lean into the fact that many vulnerable people all over the world are on the move. And we get to pause in this time of year and say, what does that mean for us as Christians who are also on the move? We're not in our landing place yet. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
I'm sure that no one else has any problem with waiting. You're the only person in the whole world that still goes with waiting.
I am particularly impatient, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's interesting. I know one image. First of all, I just feel like Christmas, we tend to think of it as, because of the baby. But really, when you read the scripture stories, they're all pretty savage and sad and shocking and painful and difficult and having to run away. And so I feel like, it's and then also nice snow or something like that. I feel like that makes it nice. I remember growing up in Mexico, it was hot in the middle of and we still had Christmas cards that had snow and everything, sort of, touch your heart. It's like an image that is really doesn't go much with the biblical Christmas story, which is very painful. I feel like the one story that stays in my heart is Rachel, refusing to be consoled and just weeping in the middle of that's sort of like part of the Christmas story, which is not a downer. I feel like it's just part of the world, thinking of the Holy Family walking, moving. I felt like we met in the last several years people who literally walked from South America to North America, but people literally deciding to walk, and the image that I have is just father, mother, and a little son or a little daughter, and just walking all the way. I feel like those images, at some point, just the way you were saying it, Sandra, I feel like I've seen that. I've seen the Holy Family. I've met them, and the one particular family, we met them at the shelter where they were staying outside in the middle of winter, outside a police station, which I feel like it's all the motifs of the Christmas story right there into one, like staying outside on a tent, which I feel like it was like that really changes your perspective of Christmas and how Jesus comes, how God is like walking with them and has hope and has. So I feel like the Christmas story is Christmas. It's very much about hope, but it's not hope about, what I'm going to get for Christmas, something like that. It's hope for the new world. And I love the way Matthew introduces or allows Jesus to speak. He allows him to speak. He wants him to speak with the Beatitudes, like the first main thing that Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew. And at some point he says, blessed are those who are thirsty for justice, like thirst for justice. And feel like that's people are walking and Jesus saying, you're thirsty for justice and building a kingdom in which you will be fully satisfied. I love that. The Christmas story, right?
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind that as you were sharing those stories is, so in our family, I'm a pastor in an evangelical context, but I grew up within the Catholic tradition and it was catechized within that tradition. And I have it's such a deep part of my connecting with God. And so during the Advent season, during Lent and during Advent, we always go to the local parish that's just down the street from our house and we participate in Las Posadas. And in the Colombian tradition, they're called novenas, but in the Mexican tradition, posadas. So we have that in our neighborhood. And we're like the only non-Mexican family that's at the posadas, but we go every year for multiple nights and multiple weeks. And we do the pilgrimage around our community. And we walk around our community and we sing songs and we stop at doors and we, sing the traditional songs of like, we're pilgrims and we're walking and we need a place to come. Can we come in your house? And they say to us, oh, no, you can't come here. And then you go to the next house, you just sing. So my children have grown up with the understanding that Christmas story is so much about trying to find a place to feel safe and to land. And so I think for them, it's very connected to their experience of being in school with their immigrant friends. So yeah.
Good.
I think one thing that really is helpful for me, sometimes I enter into Christmas and I'm ready for the good tidings of great joy, and I can be as excited about Christmas as I was as a kid. And then there's some years, and I'm kind of feeling this year, where I just don't quite feel it. Like there's a lot of darkness around, and it's a good reminder that biblically there is the good tidings of great joy, and there's reasons for that in the incarnation of Christ coming and dwelling with us. There's also Rachel mourning, refusing to be comforted. Yeah. There's deep sadness, deep darkness, and those are intermingled throughout the story. And I think we sometimes want to focus just on the happy bits of the story. It's a very sanitized manger scene, which even that, mangers are not sanitized. Like that's not, the context in which Jesus was born was not clean and comfortable and cute little animals. It was a very difficult situation for a pregnant woman and her husband forced to migrate internally first, and then within a short period of time, forced to flee their country. When my daughter was young, we have our nativity scene that probably one of us pulls out at Christmas time, and she was playing with the nativity set, and she turned to me one day and said, "Dad, this toy is missing someone. We don't have the angry king." And I thought about that. Yeah, we never put the angry king in the nativity set. We don't want that part of the story because it's really unpleasant. It's very pleasant to think about the Magi, the wise men.
It ruins the story.
It does. Well, it complexifies it, if that's a word. It makes it difficult, but it is part of the story. Joseph being warned in a dream as soon as the Magi are back on their way to their country, and Joseph is told, you need to get your wife awake in the middle of the night and wake up your sleeping child, which is something you don't do, right? And then you need to leave immediately. which is basically the refugee story that is played out over and over and over again around our world and has been throughout human history in different contexts. And I just think that ought to inform how those of us who follow Jesus today, who are still hoping in his presence, in his incarnation, would respond to people coming from very similar circumstances around the world today.
Yeah, that's so good. I especially love it when children are some of the best theologians that we can lean on.
Absolutely.
Like something is missing here.
That's so beautiful. And I love what you said about, even how Jesus led in the book of Matthew with the Beatitudes, which is basically the ethics of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I've been really chewing on and reflecting on these days is how in the book of Matthew, he's writing primarily to a Jewish audience. So he emphasizes the spiritual reality. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice. And blessed are those who,
the poor in
blessed
spirit.
are the poor in spirit.
Yeah.
And then in Luke, the Beatitudes are written to a Gentile audience, primarily to Theophilus. And he says, blessed are those who are poor, full stop. And then blessed are those who hunger now. Where there's an emphasis on the material realities that God is breaking in and has broken into this world, that his kingdom is being made manifest in this world. And so I love that. Now, as we think about Christ's presence in and among the vulnerable, especially today, and we think about the ways in which, so many young people are wrestling, especially from brown and Asian communities around the migration and immigration enforcement. What are you seeing? Are you seeing a lot? I mean, within the Asian American context, 1 in 7 undocumented people are Asian American or Asian, of Asian descent. But I'm curious, from your vantage point, what are we seeing? We're in Chicagoland.
Yeah.
I
feel like people ask me, hey, how are people feeling in Little Village? There's been just an onslaught of ICE raids coming. And it's interesting, thinking about it, I felt like I have been feeling like there's on one corner, there's deep sadness. Deep sadness and fear, I think. Sadness and fear, and people who, I always think of Hagar, like she finds the God who sees her. And then people are asking, hey, God, can you make me invisible? I don't want to be seen. And it feels like that's totally the opposite of what should happen, but this time, so that's on one side, fear and want to be invisible. I've never heard people praying, like, God, would you make me invisible? So that's heavy. On the other side, there's anger. And I feel like anger it's a good anger, like it, just so long as it can be, pushed forward. And it's interesting, older migrants tend to be fearful. Younger, the children of immigrants tend to say justice, which I feel like is the spread of life, is the spread of the work of the kingdom of Jesus, and then in between is puzzlement, just like people with very little answers. Most of us have no answers, or little attempts to answer, but I think there's energizing of anger. It's interesting, a parent or a mother might feel like, I just want to stay home and I just don't want to go anywhere. And the young daughter or son are like saying, I want to be out in the street, protesting, having my phone, recording, saying something, can we go and march? Can we go and pray? Can we, be out in the street, be present? I want to be seen and known, because I want to speak up. And it feels like it's interesting to see that change. And I think our young men and women are looking to the church to see whether the church will sit back and hide, or whether Jesus actually does have something to say. And Jesus has so much to say. But I wonder if the church is just following the pattern of hiding. Somehow we'll just stay in our building, do our own thing, maybe even move it to Zoom, and that's the extent of the practical outwork of our faith. And I think I see a bit of a sense of, I'm watching the church. Does the church have anything to say? Will the church mobilize? Is the church the steward of the work of God and the sense of God towards the world, And I feel like that's an important thing.
Yeah, I know we have talked about this a lot
yeah.
online, texting and emailing, and whenever we find time together. That I believe it is an incredible opportunity right now to reflect on how we will steward the particular passion of this generation to step forward in God's shalom and what they know is rightness. They can sense it. They may not know how to get there all the time, but they can sense it. And I would, and it's not to argue with Paco, but add on that I think they have seen the silence of the church, and I think they have seen the lack of mobilization in the church, and I think they have just said, we're going to do it anyway. And so they're doing it, like, for example, in Chicago, the young men and women on the cross country team in Lakeview who are like, we're going to, all put Mexican bandanas on and run through the streets because no one's going to tell us we can't run in our own neighborhood. We're going to run, and we're all going to be Mexican today, And I think young people, young Christians, in the context of, like, for example, what we do with Chasing Justice, they're like, we're doing it. We're marching, we're writing, we're galvanizing our small groups, we're writing curriculum, we're mentoring the youth in our youth group without the, necessarily like having something coming from the, from the top down within the church. They're mobilized and they're just doing it apart from the church now. And so for us, we're trying to say, hey, there's a way that we do this rooted in our faith that's very distinct as Christians. And if you want to be around when you're old like me, like, it's going to take a substantial Holy Spirit led, courage and energy that you cannot get in your own competencies and in your own intellect. You're just not going to get there. And so how do we fuse those? How do we connect those things and integrate those things together? But they're moving. I get calls all the time from parents from churches that I've pastored in or communities that I've been in. They're like, my child is doing these things and I don't know what to do with them. And I'm afraid they don't want to go to church anymore. Or when they're here, they feel like nothing we say connects. I'm like, the first thing I tell the parent is, you have done such a great job of raising your son, because your son recognizes that there's something wrong. And you've done a great job as a parent. So I want to commend you on that. And yes, it is difficult when they feel conflict between what they feel the Holy Spirit is moving them to and what the church is doing. But let's talk about how we might walk with them in that. So I think teenagers in Little Village.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I'm watching them. I'm like, I got you. I'm watching you. I'm sure there are tons of churchgoers in that group.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like the high school decided, like the principal and everybody else was like, oh, man, we should plan it for another time. High schoolers just said, hey, we're going out and we're protesting. We're walking down the streets. And I felt like everybody else had to scramble to oh, I guess this is happening. I thought that was powerful.
And even right now, as we're recording this, there's a walkout taking place at a Catholic university called Dominican, and they're all in solidarity walking out together in classes to stand with those that are being impacted. Matt, do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, one thing that I wasn't thinking about is, we're in Chicago right now, and even the dynamics where I live in the suburbs, lots of similar things happening and some similar responses and also different responses. And then, in my work, we work with churches all around the country, and I do think that there's a lot of people who have no idea what's happening in a place like Chicago. And media coverage is limited, and frankly, a lot of people don't consume traditional media. They're getting everything from their phones, and they're getting an algorithm that's telling them, on the one hand, you have young people mobilized in little corners of this country, really upset by what's happening in Chicago, because that's showing up in their Instagram feed or their TikTok feed. And you have lots of other people who have no idea the challenges facing immigrant communities, and maybe think, why are people so upset? They're just going after people convicted of violent crimes, which most people, seems reasonable, and don't realize there's people who are American citizens. There's people who have been here for decades in this country who are being taken away from their children. I think that there is just a lot. We're in such a difficult place as a country because we do not have the same information. And I don't know how to solve that. We're not going back to we all watch the same 3, television networks that tell us what to think, whether that was a good or a bad thing. But I do think it makes a real challenge as we try to disciple people and keep pushing people back to how does our faith, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, inform how we think about this dynamic. when we actually aren't even seeing the dynamic in the same way.
That's a great point. I mean, so I wonder if, for those who are tuning in and watching, if you can humanize this, what are you seeing? Because we all carry stories. We all know someone that's been impacted. But bring us to the ground. What's happening? What one or two stories that you can share in a quick soundbite as much as you can?
Well, I would share. I feel like the two things. It's a little bit less of a soundbite, but a little bit. With 2022, a lot of people who decided to leave their country and crossed 7 countries to get here. And as they arrived, many of them were saying that the Darien Gap, which is sort of like the halfway through the Pan American Highway, all the way from Alaska down to Argentina or Chile. What's Patagonia? And Argentina and Chile, they're always battling. It was like, depending on who you're asking, and she's Argentina. And and the one place where it collapses is right there in the Darien Gap, which is right the edge of South America and Central America. And there's no highways, there's no roads, there's nothing. And so people have literally decided to walk, and so they're getting here. But as they go through that rainforest, impassable rainforest, many of them tell the story about how they encountered Jesus there. And it's super interesting. One guy told me, the Darien Gap is the altar of God in the world. I was like, I don't know what that means. It was like, explain more. And then he said, when you walk through the Darien Gap, when we did, he said, I mean, it's just thousands of people. He said, you could hear 3 sounds. One of them is the slush of mud. It's like when thousands of people walk through the same, and there's rains, like just, then people breathing heavy. I did the marathon a couple times, and there's one section in which you only hear people breathing heavy, and it's kind of horrible to see, like, oh man. And then the third sound, he said, everyone nonstop for like 2 days, just praying, oh God, help me, oh God, help me, oh God, help me, oh God, help me. And then they arrived in this country, and then they were bused to Chicago in the middle of the winter. And I remember meeting so people coming into Chicago, and they have encountered Jesus, and so their heart is like leaning towards God. I have encountered you through the entire thing. I have, in the last several years, I have never experienced personally, I've been a pastor for 2 decades, I've never experienced personally that much hunger for God. Like people, we've baptized more people in the last 2 years than in the last 20 years. We've done weddings for people who were living together, and then they said, hey, maybe I should really get married, like, I think this is wrong. Nobody told them, they just, like conviction. And I feel like in my little corner of the planet, of the world, I've experienced something that we have been praying for throughout years. I feel like every pastor, at some point when pastors gather, eventually if they're going to pray for revival. We don't know what we're asking. We have no idea. I feel like that's the thing that pastors do. And I think I experienced a little bit of an edge of revival. And now the same demographic that keeps them praying for revival in the country seems to want to destroy that revival, which it feels like this is young, and it's coming from below, and it's passionate, and it's fiery. And then we're saying, like, Bible-based people throughout the country, get rid of those migrants. I think those migrants might be the answer of Jesus to this world. So just to give you a story, a few weeks ago I was preaching. I tried to preach with passion, like leave everything there. I know 20 years ago when I preached, I used to roll around in the ground and jump, and I don't do that anymore. Thank God for it, but still passion. And I finished preaching, and there was a couple that came to the front. We had led them to the Lord. We baptized them in Lake Michigan. We did their wedding, and they were at the very front, second row, husband, wife, and their little daughter, who is, Venezuelans, they go all out with their little daughters with hair and everything. It was like just beautiful. She stood at the chair the entire time, looking back, looking forward, running around everywhere. I love that. And so I finished preaching. They came up to the front. We prayed over them. And then the next morning, Monday morning, they're coming out of their house, all three of them. And ICE was waiting for them. And they literally said, they had copies. It's like, it's the copy of my Social Security, and here's a copy of my permit. And the answer was, turn around. And they just cuffed him, put in a car, drove him all the way down to wherever, and then the wife eventually was released because of their little daughter, but she has an ankle bracelet. And the husband is gone, And I'm like thinking, these two thoughts that I had. One of them is, I need to start preaching differently, because I might be preaching with people who I only see 1 week and then they are gone. I feel like that changes everything for me. And on the other side is like, I think these people, Bible believing, fully transformed, strong marriage, they've done things right. They are the hope of the world. They are the hope of America. We want more of that. And somehow now we've broke it. And I feel like that stayed in my heart. I feel like everything has changed in a sense for me.
It's really powerful.
I think one thing that comes out in Paco's story that is important for people to understand is what's happening with immigration enforcement is affecting a lot of people, including a lot of people whom our government has allowed into the country lawfully.
Yes.
And that's missed in a lot of the media coverage. And I'm also sympathetic to the person who came in 30 years ago and crossed the border without a visa and their families are impacted. But this is affecting people who have followed all the rules and nevertheless are being caught up and held in detention centers, taken from children, taken from their families.
They crossed every T,
disappearing.
and they dot every I.
And I think, and to add to that, it's affecting people who are U.S. citizens, who were born here, who are fourth generation Mexican or Puerto Rican, or because our administration has said it's okay to profile people who speak Spanish or speak, an Asian language and look brown and don't look like. And so I think what I think is what I see, like when I see stories, like everybody's afraid. My husband was like, don't take the train tomorrow, last night. Don't take the train because if you arrive late, who knows where ICE will be. And I'm like thinking to him, like, you don't know, do you see how white I look? Like, but he's scared because it doesn't matter anymore. It's like, do you look racially ambiguous, but not fully, European white? We'll take you. People are scared. I think that's, we're having to tell our parents, keep your passports on, or keep a copy of your passport on you. We're having to tell our neighbors. I mean, so two stories. There's a young guy who lives downstairs in our unit, and he's Puerto Rican. He's a U.S. citizen. He's a brown guy. He went to a hardware store to buy something. He was abducted by ICE.
Wow.
His father came. He said that he's a U.S. citizen. They didn't care.
And that's out of control.
They don't care.
Yeah.
The other one was on the news the other day, or I think it was your post or Matt's. It was like the story about the family that was pepper sprayed.
Driving. Yeah.
Pepper sprayed by ICE. No conversation, no interaction, just completely pepper sprayed.
Just threw pepper spray into the window as they're driving.
An infant. And I was like, just trying to process that. And I posted about it. And then a friend called me, young Asian American woman, called me and said, I treated that family.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And it was bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, it's affecting all of us. And even people that don't live in cities like Chicago, I'm just like, it's coming to you.
Yeah.
Just so you know, it's coming to you. And that's why I think coalition and networks are so important in this time, like denominational networks, like coalitions of pastors and organizations, like to be sharing information, to be talking about like, what is it that you're doing? How are you providing trauma-informed care for teenagers and young people? How are you preaching differently? How are you walking through this Advent season in different ways? 'Cause I think we just have to be, when things were happening in LA, I called LA. I called all the pastors I knew in LA. I said, tell me what's happening because I know it's coming here. And now that they're saying, hey, we're going to these other cities, I'm like, please, I ran into people. I said, please call me. Please call us. I think we're working on something that's an interfaith, inter-ethnic, diverse coalition that might work in your city, but you have to figure out how it works for you. So I think conversation and community and connectedness, like pastors, we can't work by ourselves organizationally. We have to be in conversation with one another and say, how are we doing? How are we helping this? I spoke at a conference recently, and 2 women that work in public schools came to me and said, thank you so much for putting this story out there and putting it out directly, because we work with kids. And they are so traumatized and terrorized, and we don't know how to help. We've never seen anything like this, and we don't know how to help, and they're professionals, and just to have someone say it out loud and stand there with all the feelings that we feel in this moment helped me understand that I've been carrying a lot too. So I think we have to think about families, children, and the second-hand trauma that we're experiencing as caregivers along the way. And so she shared with me this particular story about one of her grade schoolers. And then she said, and part of it is like, I'm trying to help them like have these talking circles and do all this deep work, and also just be 7. Like they just have to be 7. And so I think that's the complexity of this moment. Like sometimes our kids just want to be 7. Sometimes our kids just want to be 14 and talk about whatever. Like my sons, like our conversations are about Ukraine, Sudan, immigration, ICE, and rizzing. Like I'm like, what are we talking about here? And I'm like, what does that mean? Can you help me out? Like, so I think it's complex.
6, 7.
6, 7. We did this. No, I'm serious. We did this event at CCDA. It was a youth lab for about 30 11 to 17-year-olds. They were mostly 11 to 15. And we did all this stuff around justice and cause corners and how do we change the world. And they had these incredible ideas about the intersection of mental health and violence and mental health and being unhoused. And then every once in a while they were just like 6, 7, or she likes him, or what. And I'm like, this is the complexity of working with young people, is that they just have to also take a break, leave the session, and go and do admin abuse for brain rots. I don't know what that is, but they just had to leave, do it, and come back. So I think we have to leave some. It's complex, and we have to leave space for this new moment we're in.
I mean, one story that is close to me, it's a good friend, is, and he told me I can share this, a Mexican pastor who I met in church here in the Chicagoland area, who made the really difficult decision to leave his town and his country because he was getting death threats associated with his ministry, and made it to the border back in 2022, waited at the border for a while, was allowed into the country, which was happening at that point in some circumstances, eventually ended up in Aurora, Illinois, where I live, and filed his asylum claim after, long story short, because it's hard to find an attorney, and filed all of the application. And he's got his probably final asylum hearing early in 2026. And it's been a struggle, but he's working, his wife's working, they're making it, they're covering their rent. And then a few weeks back, he got a notice to appear for an immigration check-in. And that was profoundly upsetting because, he had done those early on, and then they said, you know what, we're gonna take off the ankle bracelet. You don't need to come in for check-ins because you're doing everything you're supposed to do. Just check in over this phone device, on an occasional basis. So when they called him in for a physical in-person check-in in Chicago, that was profoundly upsetting because it was at a facility where we know that lots of people with very similar circumstances who are lawfully present, who have a pending asylum claim, were being detained. and he has his whole church fasting and praying for a week before this check-in. And I mean, I was not sleeping well, just anxious, trying to find an attorney who can go with him. Attorneys are very stretched right now in the city of Chicago. And in his case, thank God, he got through his check-in and they let him go. And he still has his asylum hearing. We're still praying it goes well. I thought I would sleep well that next night because he's, for the moment, safe. And I didn't actually sleep well. And I found myself just thinking through watching him hug his family goodbye that morning. Not knowing if he would ever see them, maybe ever again. I mean, he is genuinely afraid that he was going to be detained and then deported and then killed by the people who are threatening him as soon as he arrives. And it was so heartbreaking to think about his daughters, his wife, and of course himself. And I was also thinking about the Bible because he's a pastor, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the Bible. When I talk about immigration in churches, a lot of time the questions come to Romans chapter 13. Well, God establishes government. Doesn't that sort of answer how we should think about immigrants? And the interesting thing is, if you read Romans chapter 13, it says that the government should be a terror to those who do what is wrong, but never to those who do what is right. And what I kept thinking of is, here's this guy who actually has done everything that our government has asked of him, fleeing persecution because of his faith in Jesus. And our government is a terror to him. He is terrified, very reasonably so, based on dynamics that are happening here in the city of Chicago. And for me, as a US citizen who happened to be born in this country, I get to read Romans 13 a little bit different. And my job is then to use the authority that our government invites of citizens to try to change a system that is not working well, that is profoundly dysfunctional and harmful to people, to children. And I think we need to take that responsibility seriously, because what's happening right now is not right. It's not just.
Now, I want to hear more stories, but you said that Romans 13 articulates that the government should be a terror to those who did wrong. Now, some people might be arguing that, well, people who are undocumented and came here illegally did wrong, so shouldn't the government then be a terror? What's the Christian response to that?
We could have a good conversation on that, and this is a great theological debate. Our view at World Relief for a long time has been we need policies that are orderly and just and ensure security for the people of the United States. We think we ought to have secure borders. We want our government to know who's coming into the country and to do everything reasonably possible to keep out those who are doing wrong. At the same time, we want to protect family unity wherever reasonably possible. We want to treat people humanely because every person is made in the image of God. And when it comes to public policies, there are actually policy solutions that are in that direction of saying we can encourage our government to distinguish between someone who not only broke an immigration law, but also committed a violent criminal offense. I'm not here to defend someone who killed someone. I think there are consequences for that and they should get due process, but that's not the people we're talking about here. But if you look at immigrants who are detained, at least the last data that's been publicly released, 7% of them have been convicted of a violent offense. We're talking about a lot of people who are not in that category. And what we've said at World Relief is there could be a different consequence for having overstayed a temporary visa or crossed the border unlawfully. People would be very willing, in my experience, to pay a fine. And we think that would both affirm the law while also keeping families together and ending a situation where right now people are afraid to go to the grocery store, afraid to go to their jobs, afraid to go to church. And I think then going forward, we need to address the fundamental problems in our immigration system. The vast majority of people who are here unlawfully are not here unlawfully because of some sort of casual disregard for legal systems. It's because they almost never qualified to come lawfully in the first place, even though if they get here, there's a job waiting for them. So if we had a visa system that was tied in some sort of a rational way to the labor markets of the United States, and of course would also look at how do we keep families together so we don't keep spouses apart for years at a time, how do we offer refuge to those who are fleeing a genuine, well-founded fear of persecution. There's not going to be a perfect solution there, but we could do much better as a country. And there are both Democrats and Republicans who for decades have been putting forward that sort of proposal, and it just doesn't get its way through Congress. And I think we need the church to rise up and say, now is the time we really need to solve those issues.
Yeah, and I think, we've been working together since 2012. I think that's when we first encountered each other at one of the national, the evangelical immigration table events. And what's distinct and unique about this moment in time is and maybe this is what the youth are experiencing, it makes me very angry and frustrated when people want migrants to follow the law when our government is not following the law. And they keep changing policies so that someone that was on a temporary protective status or that was here on a work permit or they just all of a sudden one day they're not. All of a sudden one day it's gone, you know? And so they made them illegal in the sense of like they made them undocumented because they took that away from them. Judges have put forth, particularly in this moment in time in Los Angeles and in Chicago and coming to a city near you, when judges say you cannot use military grade weapons against citizens, and our federal government is at war with citizens. And so I feel like it just lacks a lot of integrity to ask people, hey, you should be following the law. And if you don't follow the law, you should be punished. Well, then most of these folks that have been in your community and in my community, terrorizing, pushing, stomping, abducting, kidnapping, disappearing our neighbors, they should be in jail. We should prosecute them. We should prosecute them. So I feel like that's what I think, to the generational thing, I think that's what with the children that have grown up here who have immigrant parents are feeling. And my mom used to tell me this all the time as a child. So if you want to know a little bit about my child, she'd be like, ay, Sandrita, it's just that you expect different things than I do. And I said, yeah, Mom, because you act like a guest. You are a U.S. citizen. You had to go through more things to become a U.S. citizen than I had to go through to become a Colombian citizen. Like I just had to sign a paper and like show up. You know, you had to take these tests, you had to learn a language, you had to do all these things. You're a U.S. citizen. You should be treated with all of the rights of a U.S. citizen. And you're acting like a guest. And I grew up here. This country made promises to me. And so because I love my country and because I love the church, I'm gonna hold my country and the church responsible to the promises they made to me, that we are one church, that we have certain rights, right? And so I'm going to keep fighting for those. This was like when I was like 22 and first starting ministry. She's like, you need to calm down. You need to calm down. I was like, I will not calm down. I will not calm down because this isn't right. This is not what God wants from us. This is not a testimony that the church should have. If we don't become the church, if we don't start acting like people who follow Christ, the church is going to be empty in 10, 15 years. And you know what? We saw the results of that. And so I think younger leaders, you know, second gen or even like folks that, you know, have grown up here, I think they expect to be treated like human beings. So when they're watching their parents get ripped away from their younger siblings by force, yelled at, called names, abused on the street, and when we're all watching that with our neighbors, like on this where I live, the corner where there's a school, a grocery store, a mental health center, and like a little shop, and there's just like war happening on my corner. And I'm like, my children are watching this. Like, how is this impacting them and affecting them? How is this making them feel safe in their own country? And so I think what it brings for me is like, yes, we must follow laws. And some laws must be changed because they're unjust and they're unethical and they're racist. And so can you imagine if we would have stayed in the 1950s? Like, you know, so we have to work really hard with organizations like World Relief and others that are doing policy change. We have to work really hard to preach scripture and to help our congregations understand the posture we should have. But we also have to work hard to hold our government accountable when they are treating human beings like animals and doing so in front of their children while their children are being traumatized. And I often think to myself, like, what will that 7-year-old or that 14-year-old or that 22-year-old, what will they be like in 10 years in this country? Like, how will they see their role as a citizen here? How will they see their role as a part of the church if the church was so silent when their dad was abducted and disappeared? You know, what will they think? So I think in this waiting period of Advent, I think it's okay for our waiting to hold frustration, disappointment, lament, not just like longing, you know, like, but longing, like the how long, Lord, longing. And I think our prayer life should be different in this moment. So I just, part of me is just like, our government's not following. We're not treating our citizens correctly. We're not treating our guests correctly. And I would like to see some accountability there because I don't want my children to continue to see what they see. And to your comment earlier about your neighbor, I think the hardest thing for me is school drop-offs in the morning. So 80+% of my children's school is children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. Many of them came in the last 4 years in waves with the buses that came as unaccompanied minors or with families. Their classroom size decreases. At least 70 to 90 families are no longer attending school in person. And every day when I drop off my kids and I watch the moms cross the street from the bus stop, like, I wonder, does this parent think this is the last time I'll see my child? Does this child think this is the last time I'll see my parent? And it's traumatizing for them. And I'm also very thankful for my neighbors who live in the area, friends who live in the area, and they'll text me like, hey, on the neighborhood group, we just saw ICE sighted 2 blocks down from your school. And then she'll call the principal, and the principal will say, we're on lockdown today for recess. So nobody leaves the building. And they'll send an email to us and say, school pickups today is going to be at 12. If you can't come at noon today, come into the office and pick up your child, and we'll help you get out of the school a different way. And so principals, can you imagine what school principals are holding right now? Because school, their learning they can't even learn because they're terrified all day long. So families are being separated, schools are being disrupted, and also neighbors are being amazing.
I think it's also those exact same dynamics impacting the schools are impacting the church. Yeah. And I think that is a dynamic that a lot of pastors and church leaders around the country haven't fully realized. Like, I've heard, nobody's tracking this precisely, but I've heard national Latino evangelical leaders estimate that attendance at Hispanic churches in the United States might be down 30%. And I mean, if that was happening in white churches, we would all know about it. And if we believe, as 1 Corinthians 12 tells us, that there is one body, and then when one part of the body suffers, every part suffers with it, this should be an issue for the whole of the church. Theologically it is, but I think often there's a lack of awareness, and that has just profound impacts on the mission of the church. When people are, for understandable fears, not willing to come on a Sunday morning, willing to come on a Wednesday evening, not serving in the church in the way that they would like to be serving, not sharing the gospel in the way that they would like to. There's just a profound impact that I don't think the church in this country has fully reckoned with.
And I imagine for like my Catholic brothers and sisters who cannot get to church to participate in Eucharist, that's very significant for them. And so how are we helping that along? How are we serving to make sure that they can get to church? People can get to school. Yeah.
The scale is massive. I mean, it's not what it will be yet, but if this continues to grow, I mean, World Relief worked with the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Seminary and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the National Association of Evangelicals, basically ran the numbers. How is this going to affect the church if the government carries out mass deportation as they say they want to do? And it's 10 million Christians who could be removed from the United States. You've got another 7 million U.S. citizens who live in the same households as those immigrants who are vulnerable to deportation. You're looking at 1 in 12 Christian households in the United States. Like, that is a profound impact. 1 in 12 Christian households that could have at least one person removed from the country. And I don't think that the church, there's lots of good Christian leaders responding to this, and at the neighborhood level, it's beautiful, but overall, at a national level, I think we need to be raising the alarm. And we are seeing some versions of that. We're seeing, the Catholic bishops have been very outspoken of it. The Pope has been very outspoken on this, who's from Chicago. So he's probably got some connections.
Sucks.
The Pope.
There's been evangelical leaders of different ethnic backgrounds and denominational backgrounds speaking up as well, and mainline Protestants. But overall, I think there's a lack of an awareness in the church of what's actually happening and what could happen if this continues without some sort of disruption.
I was speaking with Sergio Vallega, who leads E625, which is a pretty large Latino organization, especially that focuses on youth and youth for faith formation. And he said that a lot of the pastors within his network are finding that up to 45% of their congregations are not coming to church. And so I just remember him over Zoom just being so distressed. He's like, this is not good. This is not good. People can't even worship together, and just the pain that he felt around that. Do you have any stories?
It's the burden of the elected officials to deal with creating an immigration reform that makes sense. In other words, I feel like immigrants have become scapegoats. As a second language learner, I was very intrigued by the idea of a whipping boy, and I was like, oh man, I don't even know what that is. And so when looking for it, I love phrases that are new for me, and I guess it was the idea of a prince in the medieval times that was punished for the sins of the prince. Somebody that was punished for the sins of the prince, or like in other words, is the pain of the. And I feel like migrants in this country are being used as scapegoats. There's no, like in other words, there's pain being enacted in poor communities, but the Old Testament is very clear that the measure of a country is not based on the size of their GDP or how strong their army is or how extended the borders are. It's how they care for the poor among them. And so when countries said we worship God, then the outworking of that is, well, how do you take care of the poor among you? Which I feel like is the Ten Commandments. Is as we love God, worship God, then we are being just towards those among us, because there's no other way of showing our love for God than to show it for not just, and Jesus said, if you love your friend, hey, that makes sense. I mean, everybody does it. But if you love the enemy or give to those who have no way of repaying you, that's a true working out of your faith. So if you're saying, I love God, somehow, then it means, then the question is, well, how are you taking care of those who have least rights among you, who are the most vulnerable? And I think migrants and the orphan, the widow, the poor migrants, the Bible continues to mention that, because that is a very good way of measuring whether a country really does love God, worship God.
And what you see in 1 John 4 is that you don't love God if you don't love your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
There's a clear call in Scripture that articulates like your love for God is expressed in your love for neighbor, and without that love for neighbor, you don't actually love God, which is a pretty profound and significant claim. But I'm curious more at your local church.
Yes.
Like, what are you seeing?
Hey, I've never read the book. I've never read the Bible with.
You've never read the Bible
from
as a
this
pastor?
context.
Whoa, this is a pretty big admission.
Like this context, like really feeling. Somebody told me, "Hey, your church is being persecuted." Church. I was like, "What?" And it's interesting reading through the letter, the book of James, and James is writing to the scattered church, and it's interesting. How do you become a pastor to a scattered church? Well, at some point they were part of your congregation. You knew them. You performed their weddings. You prayed for their babies, all those things. You did all that stuff, and then they were scattered. And I feel like it's interesting that James, if he is the pastor of a scattered church, he has whole chapters about the rich. And I feel like that's a little bit of my own understanding as me as a pastor. It's interesting. He's not speaking to the rich because they're part of his congregation. He's advocating on behalf of the poor, whom the reason why the church is scattered is because of those who did not care about them. I have a verse that I want to read. This is the one verse I've been thinking a lot about. He starts talking about the rich, and then he says, James chapter 5, verse 6, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. And I love that. It's like this person has done nothing against you, and you just decided, roll the dice. I'm just going to hate on immigrants. Let's destroy them. Let's bring fear into their neighborhoods, and let's, and James is saying, hey, you've done this wrong and this evil. It's interesting. We've noticed how our congregation, I pastor an English and Spanish congregation. Say, for example, on Sundays at 8 in the morning, we have a service in Spanish. A lot of those people are older, like Mexican migrants, that Mexican immigration has gone down incredibly. I mean, it's not what it used to be. It's actually, there's more people now leaving than what are coming back. And so if you were born in Mexico, then you probably have been here for 30 years or so. That, I'm 56. I know I don't look it, but maybe I do. This gray hair helps me keep me humble. But those people have been here for a long time. And so we have a service at 8 o'clock, and tends to be a little bit older Spanish. Then 10 o'clock is booming. I mean, that's English. English is booming. We've noticed how during this season, that service has been energized. I mean, like, we're praying, just like what you're saying, we're praying for migrants, we're, laying on the ground and crying out to God, and then speaking boldly and clearly about what God is saying for our community in this season, and that has energized people. And then we have a 12 o'clock service, is mostly of migrants who are recent migrants. And it's also very young, a lot of families, and that has gone down tremendously. We have another service for that is in a different language, is a Mayan language from Central America. And that congregation, 3 months ago, was 300 people, and it's gone down to 30 people. It went down to like 16, and then it's gone up a little bit more. And at some
From
point,
300 to 30.
Oh yeah, it's gone down completely.
That's 90% decrease.
A lot of that has moved into WhatsApp chat groups, and it's definitely not the same, but it's the thing that's happening. Somebody was telling me, there's just like what Matt, you were saying, the white church is not feeling this, and so there's no books being written about that. But I think at this point we have to look to China, or we have to look to other places in the world and say, how do you guys deal? How, brothers and sisters who've experienced persecution in your own country, how have you dealt with these issues? How do we continue to pastor a church that's scattered? There might be people at their homes or in detention centers, or so it brings me back to James, to a church that's scattered all over the place. How do you care? How do you love for them? How do you love them? And so our congregation has gone down. At the same time, there's a lot more collaboration between English and Spanish. Somebody decided one Sunday, somebody showed up and they said, hey, we created an Uber for our church. Like, I have no idea what that means. What does that mean? So he said, hey, just in our Spanish congregation, anybody that's feeling like they can't go and pick up their kids, or somebody actually said, I have a job in a suburb of building a porch, but I don't want to drive my truck, filled with all the materials and wood. So it was interesting because people who leave early in the morning to go and build, they're like the construction workers. It's kind of like easy pickings for ICE. And so this white dude who has a little Honda Civic, and he said, I'll drive your truck. Black guy driving the truck or white guy driving the truck is like, we're not stopping them. But and then this other brother just went in the little Honda Civic and all the way to his job, which is very different, the entire thing. And I love that love. I love that sacrifice. It's just saying, I know I need to be on my job, but I can be late. It's okay. It's okay to inconvenience myself for the sake of the other. I love seeing that sort of collaboration, which is a creativity of the church, not just wanting to survive, but it's like saying, how do we truly love one another? How do we stand for one another at the very same time? I mean, we've actually hired someone and asked them, hey, would you mind just being on the phone all day, calling people? I haven't seen your church. How are you guys doing? This is your family. We have a long roster of people who have come to our church and we haven't seen them for a while. So somebody needs to be calling them constantly and just saying, hey, can we go and visit you? Can we bring food? Can we, something like that. But that is a very different way of doing church. And it's stretched everything, but I feel like at the same time, I think it's strengthening the church in ways that we didn't know that we could be and we should be.
I think one thing that, we've been friends for a long time, so I like watching your church, kind of evolve, in the sense of like, what does it
We
mean?
were in this.
What
You're
does it
right.
mean to be your church? What does it mean to like really embrace the passions for justice that are coming from the next generation? What is it? But it brings to me this question of like, when we ask how is this impacting the church, it's not just like the numbers are decreasing, people are not coming. The question we really need to be, that I'm asking myself, that I think we really need to be asking ourselves is, what are we discipling people into?
Yep.
Like, is this even Christian faith that we're discipling people into? And that's the question I've been asking myself. Like, how do we get to the point where when you look at the numbers and the data, Christians in America broadly, but particularly white Christians, are voting against the things Jesus would want to be for? They are verbalizing with their whole chest, policies that are more anti-Christ.
Well, at the
More
same
and
time,
more.
praying,
While at the
like
same time
singing
claiming
songs that are
claiming
like,
revival,
"You're
right?
my king,"
So
and
I'm
all
like,
that kind of stuff.
so
yeah.
to me, it's like that doesn't make me angry. Like I said, I was angry before. That actually makes me so concerned and so sad as a pastor and as a theologian that what are we leading people to? Like, what are we leading people to? And what does this mean for the next generation? Particularly if Gen Z men are returning back to particular kinds of churches, right? They're being discipled into a faith that is so far from faith that when Jesus comes, he will say, I didn't know you. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me water. And when I was vulnerable, you allowed the military to come and pepper spray my children. Like, I'm so sad, honestly. I'm very sad because I believe that the Bible invites us to something so beautiful. And I've seen churches that do those beautiful things, white churches, Asian churches, black churches, but I know I've seen it in my own life. Like when COVID came and everyone started investing all of their energy into online church, that's not what our church did. They said, how is this impacting our neighbors who are day laborers who can't work every day and can't feed their families? Because if they don't work, they don't eat. And so we began to kind of be in the community in a very different, we began to amp up the food co-op that we had. And then Texas started sending us the gifts of new neighbors. And like your church, we on the Northwest side started receiving busloads. And our pastor, the lead pastor and the director of community engagement would call us and say, they're coming. And it's 3 a.m. and I'm getting my kids out of bed. And we're going to the church and families are coming and they're all of the church members, they mobilized and they showed up and they would wave flags and say welcome, and flags from all these different nations. And my son would have his class make all these little signs that said bienvenidos. And because they wanted the kids to have these like signs that they were welcome there. And people who had been on a bus for 28 hours soiled because they would not stop and let them go to the bathroom, who would show up afraid and cold in the middle of January and February and March in Chicago, would be doors open, welcomed into a church that said, we've been waiting for you and we're here for you. We want to just let you know that you're welcome. And that's the kind of discipleship I wanted for my kids. Like on Sunday mornings when we would go, there would be like at least 100 more people in the church. So from 200 to 300. And they were all wearing like the hot chocolate 5K sweatshirts because that's what we had in the basement, like boxes and boxes of hot, And my son would say, oh, these are the new neighbors. Because they all had that sweatshirt on. And they would go to kids ministry and they would translate because a lot of second, third generation Puerto Ricans don't speak Spanish. And so they would translate for the migrants, kids and our kids. And as a parent, I was like, man, my kids are going to be amazing. Because the church is raising them with the heart of Jesus. And as a mother, as a pastor, like I would want that for all the kids in the church in the U.S. to have the heart of Jesus when it comes to their migrant neighbors. And my fear is, like we went through in the times of civil rights, my fear is that we're raising kids that would be willing to take their picnic and go to a lynching right after church. I'm like, how is this different? Have you heard some of the things that are online right now? It's not just adults, it's children saying evil things about their neighbors and human beings. And I'm like, this is a crisis of discipleship. And so I just want to say, like, to people who are listening to this, people who pastor and write curriculum and do children's ministry, like, open up the Bible and allow our children to see a God who has always been with the migrant, a God who has always been with the vulnerable, a God who has always been with those who are invisible and ignored. And maybe that picture of Christ would compel them to follow Jesus in new ways. I mean, I think we have a beautiful opportunity in Advent, particularly, to show them that, the hope may not be in what we see right now, but there are beautiful things around us happening, and we need to pay attention. So, yeah, I think we can be better.
Thanks for sharing your tears.
I feel like we simultaneously get to see the best of the church responding to some of the worst crises in our communities in the world, and yet we're also so grieved by the reality that that's a fairly small fraction of the people who profess to follow Jesus in this country. I mean, we know from surveys, there's lots of Christian traditions, but if you look particularly at evangelical Christians, it's less than a quarter who say that the Bible's the top influence on their views, on how they think about immigrants. They're supposed to know that's the right answer, but it's less than a quarter who know that that's the box to check. And that's in significant part because it's less than a third who say they've ever heard about this in their church context. And I think that actually that deficit of discipleship is leading to the crisis that we're in now. And there are amazing churches among those third who maybe have heard this message, who are responding in beautiful ways. And my work at World Relief, we get to partner with so many of those churches. So I always want to be careful to affirm the beautiful things that are happening, but there's so much more potential if the church, in a unified way, would be looking to the words of Scripture, looking to the character of Jesus, which better now in this season of Advent than perhaps any other time of year, because it is the story of Christ entering in and being present with us and inviting us into that. I just think it grieves me that we don't see a whole of the church response to what's happening.
Literally, the church would have the power of changing policy in this country, like in a minute, like boom, and establishing a sort of new standard for the entire world. But we've sort of caved into the lie, the lie that military power changes hearts, and it does not, In our neighborhood, we've experienced, so I know throughout the country, the lie that is sold about Chicago is that, you like walk around and bullets are going all over the place, which is like clearly a lie. In the last several years, through collaboration of churches, community organizations, elected officials, prayer, activity, in Chicago, we've brought down violence. I mean, in our neighborhoods, gun violence has gone down 80%, which is amazing. I feel like our neighborhood feels, at the same time, in the national conversation, they're saying how violent that neighborhood is. I think it is very violent, but it's government manufactured. It's like guys that are like extremely covered. The special escort for Bobino it's interesting because it's interesting to see it. Most of them walk out of the trucks and they have the finger and the trigger of semi-automatic weapons. I mean, like when somebody should hear somebody walking down the streets with finger and triggers, that should be like cause for concern for everybody. And they are covered to the T. In other words, you cannot see skin, which almost gives you the impression that this is like a drone. This is like Star Wars. What are the white soldiers? The stormtroopers. Stormtroopers, you cannot see any skin, not even their neck or anything is all black. And that's the military escort for Bobino. And they walk down the street and they literally are, 6 foot tall guys that have only been doing weights and, like they have been fed a discipleship of violence. Might creates change, and it doesn't. And they walk down the streets and they literally grab people, which, like I'm seeing somebody is like twice my height, filled with guns on this side, and this side, and they just told me to turn around. I had to run or freeze, but even if I have nothing to fear, I have no crime, I would still either freeze or run, it's like, and that kind of thing should be fully, it's like that's violence, but the community has changed down in the ground. The narrative in our community is different. It's a growing good news that has been pepper sprayed with the government's coming, which is lying, saying we're coming to save the city. I know Greg Bovino was quoted in the news media saying, "Hey, how can you never tell the good that we're doing in the community?" Because they're not. Like, if only we would see. I think the only good Greg Bovino has done to our community is when he leaves. It's like, yes, all right, good news. Well, finally, the entire community rests.
And the thing
now
is,
we can love one another. Let's go out to eat. Like,
and the thing is, that's happening in front of our kids. Yes. So when they came to the Hermosa, Humboldt, it's like all happening in front of families, because we take our whole family grocery shopping. So it's like we're all going to get shoes, or we're all going to get groceries. So everyone's out on the street, and this is happening in front of full families, which is why my son asks me in the car on the way to school, "Mom, if ICE comes to school today, will they push me on the ground?" Because that's what he's seeing. Yeah, Mom, are they gonna? And he's already. This is my black son. So he's already like trying to deal with his all the anxiety he has being a black boy in the world, and like law enforcement in general and all his stuff. He said, "Mom, if the ICE comes, will they push me on the ground?" And I said, "No, baby, they will not push you on the ground." And I start thinking about it, I'm like, because there's so many cameras out there now. Because there's so many, everybody's got a camera, so I don't think they're gonna push you. And I'm like, man, they better not push him, or I'm going to jail today. So I think it's creating that kind of anxiety to a generation that already struggles with anxiety. And so it's happening on the main street where we go get paletas and ice cream. That's where it's happening.
So there are a lot of congregations in the country that have people who vote red and blue, and they are strongly affiliated with the positions and the policies of their political party, and they don't want to lose their congregants. In light of what we're seeing, how do you navigate that, especially as a pastor? You're talking about the great generational divide that exists between older generations and younger generations. We're seeing, challenges in translating, the scriptures into our specific context. But for the pastor that's leaning in right now, what do you tell them when it comes to this issue, when they have such a broad political spectrum within their community?
I think for me, I've always been a pastor in the context of a multi-ethnic congregation, different versions, Asian, white, black, brown, mostly black, mostly Latino. So I think I assume difference. And I think a lot of pastors, if they have a homogeneous congregation, they are not actually assuming that there's difference in their congregation. But I would just assume as pastors, as we preach, as we teach, as we disciple, that we assume that our congregation has different perspectives from generation to generation, from kind of, ethnic and racial backgrounds and experiences. So I think if we were to start from the place of assuming there are differences in our congregation and that we're preaching to those differences, then we can focus on teaching and talking about values. The value of human dignity, the value of families staying together, right? The value of loving your neighbor, and then asking the question, what does it look like to love our neighbor right now? What does it look like to love this particular neighbor? So I think a lot of times, I do think more Christians have their identity in their partisan politics than they do in actually following Jesus and understanding the Bible, as you've talked about earlier. So I think trying to preach, I never have. And I've been to many conferences where they told me, you can't talk about politics, you can't talk about political figures. I'm like, great, I don't do that. I talk about the values that Jesus is calling us to. And I do talk about particular policies, which I think are different than partisanship. It's like if we have, for example, we right now have, our government has said, we're going to put the ceiling on refugees at 7,500, right? I'm reading things right. 7,500. I'm like, whoa, I think ours typically on an annual basis has been over 100, right? 115,000, 70. Yeah. So I'm like, that is a huge difference. And of that 7,500 that we're going to allow in, we're going to really focus on these particular groups, which are not the communities we're talking about here in this conversation, right? It's white South Africans. And so I think that is a policy that we can come together around in bipartisan conversation, which is why organizations like the Evangelical Immigration Table and others exist. So it's like we can, I mean, when World Relief was running the kind of campaign around Syrian refugees, it was very easy to get my entire Latina church, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Republican, Democrat, fifth generation, first generation. I just said, we studied the book of Ruth, and I said, listen, this is not about women's ministries and loving your sister. This book is about a God who travels with those who are vulnerable and marginalized, coming to a country that is not going to welcome them. Do you know what that's like? Did you see your parents go through that? Then who of all the people in the United States of America should be for this policy and for this group of refugees than those of us that know? And it was very easy to get them to come on board with that because it was a particular policy instead of like, I need you to be a Democrat if you're going to follow Jesus, or I'm going to need you to be a Republican if you're going to follow Jesus. Because the reality is our churches are split. Yeah. I know that there are people that were in my pews that voted for this particular administration knowing they're married to an undocumented immigrant. Because 68% of Latino men voted for this administration. I'm like, how are you going to do that when they thought it wouldn't come to them? And now you're seeing it a lot on TikTok and Reels are like, oh, I just thought this would never come to us. So I'm like, this is not about partisan politics. This is about pastoral issues that affect our neighbors. It's about human dignity. And so I would say the win is talk about Jesus, exegete the scriptures, invite people to love their neighbor.
So can I push back a little bit?
Yeah.
So there are probably people thinking, well, yes, there is a values-driven decision-making process. And so we certainly uphold the value of human dignity, but we also want order in society. What do you do with people who hold those two values that seem to be clashing around this particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, I would want to interrogate what they mean by order because I feel like human dignity is order. It is Revelation 21. It is God's image and picture of shalom. When all is right between you and God, when all is right between man and man, when all is right between us and creation. So I think if what they mean by order is upholding policies that are evil in their, like inception, then I think a little disorder and chaos is very biblical. And I think we have folks like Martin Luther King Jr., folks like Mother Teresa, other folks that said, hey, that's not right. And we need to interrogate what we want as order, because some of those people, my guess is, some of those people like myself in another iteration of my life, order meant comfort. And order meant I didn't have to interrogate or ask myself, how is what I'm doing or what I'm not doing complicit in the flourishing or not flourishing of my neighbor?
I mean, Martin King would talk about how so many Christians are well adjusted to injustice and how we need to be maladjusted to injustice. So I'm curious if you have comments to either of those questions.
I mean, I would of course agree if what we mean by order is accepting injustice, we should not be for order. But I do think that there's a legitimate order that we can want our government to maintain. It's appropriate to have an orderly immigration process. We actually don't have that right now.
We don't have one, exactly.
But I think that those values of affirming human dignity and wanting families to be together and wanting security and wanting order, you could have a policy that brought all those pieces together. And I actually think, I spent a lot of time in Washington. I think there are Democrats and Republicans doing really hard work, often without getting a lot of attention right now, to try to put those pieces together. To say, what does it look like to say we should have secure borders and we should have an orderly, functional, legal immigration system, and we should keep families together while also affirming the value of the rule of law. I actually think that, there's no perfect bill, and I think as Christians we want to be careful to baptize legislation and say this is the law that came down from God if it didn't come down on Sinai. But there are good faith efforts motivated by those biblical values that there are congressional leaders working hard, often motivated by their Christian faith on both sides of the aisle, to try to find that consensus that could actually become law. And I think Christians need to pay more attention to that. And I mean, I've been at this for a long time. I remember when the sort of immigration proposals that we supported World Relief were George W. Bush's proposals. I remember when they were Barack Obama's proposals. Like, this doesn't inherently need to be a partisan conversation. And in the context of the church, I think it is extremely important that we keep it out of the partisan space. But it's also sometimes people say, well, we're not partisan, and what they mean is we don't talk about systemic issues.
Yeah.
But to your point, Sandra, we need to talk about policies that impact people. Not by saying, get in line with the Democratic Party platform or the Republican Party platform, but these are the biblical principles that shape how we think about these issues. Because I think we've gotten to the point where a pastor getting up and saying, you should love your immigrant neighbors, that's political. Well, that's just the Bible. Like, that is like a pretty close paraphrase of Deuteronomy chapter 10. You know, like, you need to be able to say what the Bible says, even though it has potential ramifications for how we think about public policy. And we also need to be willing objectively to tell people the truth of what's happening. And how do we, that doesn't mean we all have to agree on the same policies. And I think it's really important. Like, I am very upset by a 7,500 ceiling on refugee admissions. I'm not gonna tell you that 125,000 is the divine number that comes out of the Old Testament or the New Testament, right? Like, that's a prudential determination that we can apply some biblical principles to, but we won't get the specifics of policy detail. But I think sometimes in the church context right now, we're so afraid of upsetting people that we've gotten to the point where we just don't talk about this at all. And one thing I would say to encourage pastors, I actually think there's more commonality than sometimes people presume that there is across Republicans and Democrats, across different theological traditions. I spend most of my time with evangelical Christians, and we've done surveys repeatedly year after year with Lifeway Research, and we do find really disturbing dynamics around a lack of biblical awareness around immigration. What we also find is more support for some of those major principles than you might presume. 90% of evangelical Christians across ethnicities say that they want secure borders. Also, exactly 90% of evangelical Christians say that we should respect the unity of the family as we enforce immigration laws.
90%?
90%.
Wow, that's
and
good.
I think you
That
actually
makes
saw
sense.
this back
Which we're not seeing right now. So.
No,
but
and I
what
think
makes
that
sense.
there's an awareness dynamic that needs to come forth. I mean, we did see this in some ways in 2018 when there was a policy at the border separating children from parents. It took months before that broke through to mainstream awareness. I remember banging my head up against the wall that, are we really okay with this as a society that we're taking small children from their parents? But people didn't know. Once people knew, once it became a big media story, once it was on social media, that policy was opposed by most Democrats and most Republicans, by most white evangelicals, by most Catholics, all the religious demographics you could look at across ethnic groups. And you had the administration go from saying, this is our policy, this is just the law, we're just gonna enforce the law, to backtracking completely and signing an executive order saying we're not gonna do that anymore. And I hope and pray that we hit that point yesterday with what's happening, because the policies that are happening in the city of Chicago right now and in the suburbs where I live and in other parts of the United States are actually dividing families on a much larger scale than anything that happened at the border in 2018 or 2017. There are 4 million or so US citizen minor children who have at least one parent who's vulnerable to deportation. Nobody's got the foster care plan for that. Not that that would be an acceptable solution for taking children from a mother and a father who love them. But I think we need people to be aware that this is the logical consequence if we are really saying we're going to deport this many people who are vulnerable to deportation out of the law.
And I think another aspect that we haven't talked much about in this conversation, but is that it's really important for us to know our history. When I think about the Old Testament, when I was doing Old Testament Hebrew and kind of immersed in that, one of the things I walked away with was wow, God talks a lot about remembering. And I remember having this conversation with my Old Testament professor, and he was like, yeah, it's one of the most repeated commandments in the scriptures, in the Old Testament scriptures, to remember. Remember when God was with you. Remember when you were a stranger. Remember when I asked you to do that. And the reason they were judged through the prophets was because they didn't remember. And I think part of our own issue right now is that we have a selective amnesia right now. We're deciding and actually taking our histories out of the schools and not teaching our history, but our policies historically in this country have been racist. They have separated children from families when we enslaved African Americans. They separated children from family when we enacted boarding schools for Native Americans. Our policies, the early immigration policies where we would say, yes, come to our country. And then braceros, send them out again. Yes, come to our country, send them out again. The movement of fathers back and forth from Mexico to the US, that impacted generations of families. That's all American US history, right? It's American US history. There were policies we enacted that were people thought were okay. And now here we are again, separating families from children from parents. And we just went through this in 2018. So when it happened again, we should have thought, separating children from taking children out of homes in the middle of the night is probably not a good idea. It's probably traumatic. We've been through this before. So I think as pastors, as people that disciple, for me in the context of younger leaders, I'm like, look, we got to read some books. We got to know our history. We got to know why what's happening right now is happening, because we can't solve the issue that's happening right now if we don't look back and say, where were we before? Yes, the church is doing really beautiful things right now in the same way that the church was doing really beautiful things during civil rights, but it was a particular segment of the church. And a very small segment of the church. So I think we got to name a thing and say, the majority of the church in the U.S. is asleep right now. And when our grandchildren look back and say, how did my faith and my grandparents' faith answer the question to one of our nation's greatest crises, we're going to say, oh, we were all sitting around having amazing worship songs with light shows in our churches. And that is going to be something to remember.
Don't forget about the fog machines.
The fog machines too, yeah.
Hey, I would say I think I concur very much when we think of red and blue divide. Concur with you guys so much on discipleship. I feel like Christians, the foundation of Christianity is Jesus. And it's interesting, I haven't seen the church, it's like the I don't know, New Life or New Bethesda or whatever, Davidic church or Mosaic church or something like that. We don't follow Moses, we don't follow David, we don't follow Abraham, we don't follow Paul, we follow Jesus. And I feel like if as Christians we just sit and let Jesus speak into our souls, I think our Christianity would end up being zero red, zero blue, is more kingdom of God. I mean, Jesus talked about this more than anything else. And first of all, Jesus is more it's hard to listen to Jesus and feel nice, feel like, because I feel like in every way he's talking about something that is upside down. I think the discipleship is listen to Jesus, watch Jesus, and then try to imitate. Repent and then try to imitate Jesus. And I feel like that kind of thing takes us to places, because I feel like a lot of our policies begin with the Old Testament or begin with Paul, and then we try to come back and say, well, we clearly know Jesus wouldn't do that, but it's in the Bible kind of thing. And I feel like if Jesus said, the scriptures clearly speak about me. So a Christ-centered Christianity would begin with Jesus and would define Paul or David based on Jesus, as opposed to the other way around. It's like, I begin with Moses, and whatever Moses did, whatever Joshua did, and then let's see whether Jesus would be okay with it or not. But I feel like Jesus says, the book of Hebrews says, now he has spoken clearly through us. It's interesting that Jesus says to his disciples in Matthew 5, we're saying, now you are a prophetic presence. He says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice, be exceeding glad, for great is your reward, because in the same way they persecuted the prophets that came before you. I feel like the church, when it gets married blue or gets married red, it loses its prophetic presence. This sort of presence that says, okay, you guys can be doing that thing, but Jesus is about this. And then public policy and all that flows for the church out of Jesus' kingdom. I feel like that's a different flow out of. I would like the church in America to just read Jesus, struggle with Jesus and quote Jesus, and out of Jesus make policy and decide, just sort of knowing in deep humility, there's no way that we can be perfectly following Jesus, but man, we're trying, it's like, this is what he says, and I hate it, and I don't like it. And I feel like the people that most hated what Jesus said were his disciples. They're like, oh man, if only you can hate this Canaanite woman or hate this, like this Zacchaeus guy, and Jesus, like, they're eating hot dogs with Zacchaeus. They're like, oh yeah, it's like, Zacchaeus, tell me more. I feel like it's just, those are the places I wouldn't want to go. Those are the people I wouldn't want to talk with. But then Jesus says, just follow me.
Yeah. I didn't realize they had hot dogs back then.
Mexican tacos, I was going to say. There's Jesus eating pitas.
This made me think, Paco, something I read recently just spurred something out of my mind, because I also think sometimes I'm at a point where I just like, what's wrong with the church? Like, how can they miss this? But I was reading this passage where the Apostle John, among others, was, they were at the Samaritan village and they didn't welcome Jesus. And John's so excited, like, oh, could we call down fire on them? And you get just the level of prejudice that was there. Yeah. But by, I think that's in Luke, by Acts, John is there calling down the Holy Spirit on the people of Samaria. So something about interacting with Jesus was so transformative. And I want to really hold out that hope that the Holy Spirit still at work. Encountering Jesus still changes people who I might be ready to kind of give up on in some cases. And I've seen that happen. I also know that happened in my own life at a certain point, right? And I want to keep remembering that story as well, that, God so intervened in my own life that it made this difference where I have this different perspective now, but he's still doing that. And to be praying for that, praying for that genuine revival that you've seen little bits of in your church in Little Village, Paco. My colleague Daniel Yang wrote something the other day that it really struck with me. He said, there's lots of people speculating, is revival happening? If revival's happening, you won't read about it on social media. It won't be about how many people are in a stadium. We'll know revival is happening because the vulnerable will tell us. Because true revival will lead to seeking justice. And my hope and prayer...
the poor experience good news.
Exactly. It's right out of Jesus' own words in Luke, and that is my prayer, is that we would be on the verge of that revival. Yeah. But it won't be about smoke machines and lasers or, something happening on TikTok or Instagram. It'll be about people coming to repentance, seeking God's justice, and the vulnerable of the world, immigrants in this country and refugees, and frankly, people all around the world who are suffering right now, they will be able to tell us that there's been a revival because they will be lifted up by justice.
It's really good.
Just so you know, if you're not familiar, there was a pretty groundbreaking study that was done by Stanford and Dartmouth, which validates a lot of what all of you are saying, that showed that political affiliation or partisan politics is a greater source of identity than race, ethnicity, and faith for the majority of Americans. And so that means people identify more with their political party than they do with their Christian faith.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's something worth.
That's pretty big.
And the work that work that Michael Emerson is doing right now, the research that he's kind of revealing is saying the same thing. Particularly, even in the context of the multi-ethnic church, you could be in a diverse church, and yet your allegiances are more to political parties than they are to the values of your Christian faith. So it's probably what we've all experienced, in conversation with friends, that we're trying to hope to come together in coalition on something, and it's like, we don't want to work together because X, Y, and Z, So that's a change that needs to happen.
Now, as we come to a close on this
I'm enjoying this conversation. One more.
Yeah, as we come to a close on this conversation, we're here in Advent season. And so we started with Advent, we're going to conclude with Advent. And as we're thinking about all that's taking place, knowing that we have a kingdom to both live out here and now, but also to anticipate, what are some kind of concluding thoughts that you would offer?
Mary. Can't have Christmas without Mary. And Mary, this young girl whose faith is on fire. It's just the Holy Spirit through the angel Gabriel shows up. And Mary is the Greek translation of the Hebrew name Miriam. And we know Miriam because Miriam sang. Miriam sang of God's salvation. It's revolutionary. It was like Miriam sang. I love it. The pandero, how do you say that? The tambourine. Tambourine. I can't think of Miriam without thinking of a pandero. You know, it's like just dancing and singing crazy things that had never been said in the entire Bible up until the moment that Miriam led the people of God to sing. And then we have Mary, this young teenage girl that by the grace of God it's pregnant, receives bad, beautiful, good news. And they struck them, and she has in her womb contradictions, like her shame and the world's hope, which I feel like that's like on the belly, like it's right here. And she sings. And I felt like her song, it always makes me weep. It makes me think I never want to preach anything else on Christmas other than the Song of Mary somehow. Or I don't know, I want to say this. I don't want to let Christmas go by without giving Mary a hearing to what she has to say to the world. And she says that those powerful, this little baby will bring down the powerful and would give gifts to the rich, to the poor. In other words, here's hope, and it's right. So here's a young lady who has been confronted by the encounter with Jesus. Whatever God has given her, she's confronted, and it's not an easy burden to carry. But she, instead of running away, she confronts it and she walks towards it. And I love that. I feel like that reminds us of what we're saying about young men and women who are like experiencing the brutality of this world, while at the same time is like a deep reservoir of faith, and says, Jesus might not be what I thought it was going to be. But I'm not running away. I enter into that reality, and that brings hope to the world. And I love the fact that she becomes a prophet and a poet at the same time. She sings about it, and she sings in, it's not in narrative, but in, it's a poem. There's so many different sides to the Christmas story. I feel like if only we just go to look at Matthew and John, and just preach Jesus, go and struggle with Jesus and the Christmas story, and let the world know, it's like.
Well, Paco took mine. I always ask.
I saw him looking over at your phone. I was like, ah.
I always ask to preach the first Sunday of Advent, so that I could preach
Revolutionary
the
Mary.
arms, the tenderness of the promise. But as you were speaking, it actually reminded me of one of the trips that we took to the border. I don't remember if it was San Diego or El Paso. I can't remember, but San Diego, Tijuana, and there were all those tents. Do you remember? I think we were together, and then there were all those tents in the
Chaparral.
And there's this artist rendition of the Holy Family in a tent, in a migrant tent that reminds me of that. And as we were going through those tents, I think it was you and me and Robert Child Romero and a few others, and I heard this, milagrosos, abres caminos, cumples promesas, luz en tinieblas, mi Dios, así eres tú. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. And as I heard that song in Spanish, I was like, wow, this Nigerian woman's song has made it to Latin America, And I thought about how different it was to sing that song and to hear that song at the border with these tents and families in the tents. Months later, I was walking, we were doing construction in my church, and I was walking to the English service through the Spanish service, which was now bigger than the English service. about 300 people, and I was walking through their service. And as I walked in the door, they were singing. And as I walked in, I felt the Spirit go like this to me with their song, and they were singing, Milagroso abres caminos, cumples promesas, luz en tinieblas, mi Dios, así eres tú. And I was walking through as they were singing, and I felt God's Spirit like push me through the Spanish congregation into the hallway. And I thought, my God, the things these people have been through. And they're there singing about Jesus being the light in the storm. That's a hope I don't understand. So from the border on the bus to Chicago, the people came singing the song because they believed this God that Mary spoke about that was in her womb, this promise of a God who tears down and builds up, who brings this upside down kingdom where the far are brought near and the low are brought high, and our understanding of reality is not actually as it should be. And I think that's what Advent is to me. I think that's the message of Advent. It's the unexpected King who came, the unexpected Savior Messiah who came as a Palestinian refugee through a woman who was so scared and yet knew there was something beautiful that was coming. And I think that's the spirit that our neighbors and our church congregants and our migrant communities carry, that kind of faith that I think revives us at Advent. Because a lot of the young people that I work with who are not from those communities, not from marginalized communities, boy, they're so angry. And they're just like, screw the church and screw God, and I'm just like, that's not the message that the people you're advocating for actually have in their hearts. Yep. That's not the message they have in their hearts. So let's not just work for them. Let's actually learn from them and work with them so that your spirituality can be revived to say, yeah, the world is really that bad. We are in a dumpster fire right now. God is really that good. And both of those things can exist at the same time. And that is the season of Advent.
As you were talking about the journey that people have been on, I think one of the things that we often forget is that we're exiles in a foreign and strange land as Christians. But I remember, Matt, the last time I saw you, you shared something that was like gut-wrenching. And you said that, as people are coming from Honduras, especially women, they deliberately take contraceptives so that they wouldn't get pregnant because they knew they would be assaulted on that journey. I'm curious if you can shed more light into that and then close us out for our time together.
Yeah, the journey that people take is profoundly dangerous, and many of them know that going into it, which I think speaks to the horror that they're fleeing in so many circumstances. And what breaks my heart is then to get to the place where you think you're going to be safe. And at different points in US history, people have found safety here and refuge here, and that's a beautiful part of our country's legacy that has been inconsistently true. And yet to then arrive and be turned away and to wonder where to go back to. Like that's, as I think about Advent and Christmas, I come from a family that we love our Christmas traditions. Like the first real tension in my marriage was when I realized that, wait, you don't presume that we would go to my family's house for Christmas? I've never been anywhere but my family's home for Christmas. Home for Christmas is Immigrant's best album, and also everything has to be exactly the same. I love the traditions, I love being with my family. But the maybe irony of the biblical Christmas story is it's not about finding, a cute, cozy home in the winter. It is about leaving home. It is about Mary and Joseph leaving Nazareth and having to go at a very inconvenient time because of a government edict to Bethlehem. It is about, sometime later being forced to flee from Bethlehem because of persecution from an unjust government. And then big picture, it's John 1, it's the Word becoming flesh. It's Jesus leaving heaven, emptying himself, as it says in Philippians 2, taking on human flesh because of love. And to your point, Ray, that's the Christian story, and this is something that I need to learn from my immigrant brothers and sisters, and I think a lot of American Christians need to learn, is that we are all longing for home. That is, I mean, in the book of Hebrews, we're told that that is like the story of faith. It is people looking for a better country. The Apostle Peter writes about to the church and says, "You are aliens and strangers on earth." That is actually our identity, and something that immigrants who have experienced that in a temporal sense, having been forced out in many cases of one country, often through awful circumstances, trying to find a place to belong, is actually what we are all supposed to be in this liminal place, seeking the fullness of God's kingdom. And that fits right into that story of Advent, that longing for a true home. I mean, it's the end of Psalm 23 to be dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. That's the end of the story. And yet, living with that tension of things are not all as they should be. They are not all as they should be in our neighborhood. They are not all as they should be in our churches. And yet, there is this hope that the incarnation brings, that Jesus will return and set all things right. And he invites us to be pursuing that now, to be seeking his kingdom and his justice and his righteousness. I think that's sort of I want to keep that in the front of my mind, not just at Advent, but it's a good reminder that this is actually the Christian story.
Oh man, I like that. That preaches. Amen.
My prayer is that we would move towards the promised land with the Joshua and the Caleb generation, that we would not be left behind like Moses was, and that we would be able to somewhat keep up with the younger generations who truly care about the fuller kingdom of God and want to apply the word of God into every context that they're seeing. And so this conversation was so great. Thank you so much for leaning into this and for sharing from your stories, from your experiences, from the work that all of you are doing. And I hope that everything that was shared would bear fruit.
Thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.